I want to lay the foundation for the rest of my opening statement based on an ABC News story, August 4th. Russian President Vladimir Putin's most prominent opponent was sentenced to an additional 19 years behind bar on extremism charges. A Russian judge delivered the guilty verdict and sentencing in the closed-door trial against Alexei Navalny at a courtroom inside the maximum security prison camp, where the Russian opposition leader is already serving 11 and a half years. Russian prosecutors had requested a 20-year prison term for the latest charges, which stem from Navalny's pro-democracy campaigns against the Putin regime. U.S. Department of State spokesperson Matthew Miller said in a statement, "For years, the Kremlin has attempted to silence Navalny and prevent his calls for transparency and accountability from reaching the Russian people. By conducting this latest trial in secret and limiting his lawyers' access to purported evidence, Russian authorities illustrated yet again both the baselessness of their case and the lack of due process afforded to those who dare to criticize the regime." I said, oh my God, in many ways they're talking about what they're doing to Trump. What the Biden regime and the Democrat Party is doing to Trump. Except what they're doing to Trump is worse. Donald Trump faces, with the Manhattan District Attorney, the Democrat, left-wing, Soros prosecutor, up to 136 years in prison on completely bogus charges. Up to 136 years. That's a lot more than the 30 Navalny's facing. On these federal cases, the Biden administration, we've got 32 counts for willful retention of national secrets. It's the next president, mind you. 6 for obstruction of justice, 2 for false statements. That amounts to, by my calculation, another 450 years. Maximum sentence. Then he's charged in the so-called January 6, 2020 election matter, 2 for obstructing an official proceeding, that's 20 years each, 1 for conspiracy against the right to vote, an old Klan act, that's 10 years, 1 for defrauding the United States, 5 years. So Donald Trump is facing, at least theoretically, maximum 641 years in prison. And the Atlanta DA, the radical Democrat, she hasn't come forward with her supposed mob charge, RICO, that she's plotting, we understand. I want you to think about this. Putin puts this guy away for 30 years. 30 years. And our State Department objects. What about due process? What about all these things, ladies and gentlemen? You have a judge, Judge Beryl Howell, who was the chief judge for these district courts in Washington, D.C. up to a few months ago. She heard every single motions case that came before her from the government, that is the special counsel, and from Trump. She's a lifelong Democrat. She was appointed by Barack Obama. Before that, she worked 10 years directly for Patrick Leahy, another radical Democrat, in the U.S. Senate. She ruled in favor of the Biden administration and against Trump 100% of the time. She denied Trump attorney-client privilege in a secret proceeding, and her opinion has yet to be released. You need attorney-client privilege if you're going to have due process. She authorized the secret search of Trump's Twitter account because she said she believed he would flee if he knew about it. So a secret search warrant requested and gotten by Jack Smith and the boys in front of this radical Democrat judge who rules against Trump 100%. This judge is no different than the Putin judge. No different. I don't care how she got to the bench. No different. And what does she do? She rules that Trump is a flight risk. Therefore, we will not inform him of this search warrant. And go for it, boys. Get all the stuff you want off of Twitter that you can. Against a former president who's running for president, goes to the Circuit Court of Appeals. The Circuit Court of Appeals is what the Democrats want to do to the U.S. Supreme Court. They added several seats to that court when Obama was president and Harry Reid ran the United States Senate. They added several seats for the purpose of Obama appointing circuit court judges to that court. That's exactly what he did. It's the second most powerful court in America, given where it is, given the kinds of cases it hears, and it is 100% controlled by the Obama Democrats, just like most of the district courts are. Just like most of the district courts are. Trump would flee? That just gives you more evidence of what the hell's going on here. And there's more. We got a decision the other day from Judge Tanya Chutkan. It is largely incoherent, as you would expect. She's not the brightest bulb on the court, but then again, there aren't many bright bulbs on that court. She delivers what Fox says is a mixed ruling. So she says, you know what? The Trump lawyers have a point. They need to see the information in order to defend their client. So when it comes to sensitive information, however, she broadens the definition and she says, you cannot talk about this. Huh? You cannot talk about that. So she broadens what sensitive information means, which is amazing. So there she is. She's the judge. And on her own, she could have said to the government, but you have a leaking problem. Here's a New York Times article by Maggie Haberman and another group of phony journalists. Previously, secret memo laid out strategy for Trump to overturn Biden's win. Just a few days ago. This document is referenced in the indictment, the January 6th indictment, so-called. The government does not present it because it says it's too sensitive. And then they leak it to the New York Times. And it had to be them. They're the ones who have it. They're the ones who've made a big issue out of it without presenting it publicly to the court. And then they leak it. And it was all over the media. And this Judge Chutkan acts like nothing happened, like she's not even aware of it. Now, if I were a judge, which I'll never be, I would have dragged the government's ass right there into my courtroom, and I would have said, see this article? Now, I want you to explain it, because it's not possible that it came from the Trump team. It came from you. And I'm ordering the Department of Justice to conduct an investigation. She didn't do that. A lawyer allied with President Donald Trump first laid out a plot to use false slates of electors to subvert the 2020 election in a previously unknown internal campaign memo that prosecutors are portraying as a crucial link in how the Trump team's efforts evolved into a criminal conspiracy. So who do you think leaked it? The government. And by the way, I'm not even going to get into the substance right now. This is what we call in Philadelphia bull S. I think we should call it everywhere. That's exactly what it is. You're allowed to have other electors. I explained last week about 1876, about 1960. I've educated people all over the country about this, including other hosts. This is the way it goes. It's not a criminal conspiracy. And besides, they charged him with the Klan Act. They charged him with Enron statutes. They charged him with financial fraud statute. That's not a crime. That's not a crime. Remember when I presented to you over 40 leaks by the government over a 6-month period to CNN, to the New York Times, to the Washington Post? They're right here. The judge could have found them. Anybody could have found them. Even Maggie Haberman could have found them. Here they are. Who's doing all the leaking? And Jack Smith, the so-called special counsel, had the guts or the gall to go into that courtroom last week and say to the judge, how dare Trump's lawyer go on TV? He keeps talking and talking and talking about his case. He's allowed to, pal. This isn't The Hague. It's the United States. And what about this? Nothing. No big deal. It never is. Now, who's Judge Tanya Chutkan? Lifelong Democrat, appointed by President Obama. So far, Trump gets Obama judges in Washington, D.C. He gets Democrat grand juries. He gets a Democrat prosecutor who worked for Eric Holder and who was close to Jim Comey. And if there's a trial, he'll have a Democrat jury. Democrat, 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 Democrat. He's surrounded. She was an Obama-Biden donor. She previously worked at the law firm that also employed Hunter Biden. She's ruled before against Trump. She stripped him of executive privilege, which means that the hapless Mike Pence and others now are free to talk about all discussions they had with the former president. How is a president supposed to seek counsel from his vice president, from his lawyers, from his chief of staff, from anybody, when under the color of a grand jury investigation, they can strip him of his executive privilege and strip him of his attorney-client privilege? So to sum up, attorney-client privilege, a secret order issued by an Obama judge with Patrick Leahy connections, so the president can't have attorney-client privilege or due process. His executive privilege power is stripped of him from the other Obama judge. She strips him of that so the president's unable to speak to his advisors in the future. We have a secret search warrant that's issued on Trump's Twitter account social media at the request of the Biden government again, and it's issued in secret, and they don't even inform the President of the United States in case he wants to challenge it, that is Trump. And now we have the January 6th committee that has destroyed evidence and information related to their investigation of January 6th. The Democrat House of Representatives established this January 6th committee, whose members were all picked by their Speaker, Nancy Pelosi, including the two never-Trumper Republicans. The investigation and hearings were run like a Stalinist show trial. And despite having no evidence of Trump leading an insurrection or involved in a seditious conspiracy, they said he committed crimes, and they referred the matter to the Biden Justice Department and urged criminal prosecution of Trump. So despite directives from the incoming Republican majority to protect and retain all January 6th committee records, the Democrats destroyed, in violation of federal law and House rules, untold amounts of information gathered during the course of their so-called investigation, including any records that might embarrass Pelosi for failing to secure the Capitol despite receiving information of possible violence. Her rejecting Trump's offer of 10,000 armed National Guardsmen to protect the building, raw investigative information that may have contradicted the committee's show trial, any communications between the committee and the Biden administration, media, and political operatives, and any information, important, that might be useful to Donald Trump in fending off the bogus charges brought by Biden's prosecutor regarding January 6th. All gone. And so now we have prosecutions of Donald Trump at the federal level, using the 1871 Ku Klux Klan Act, using the Enron statutes, using a financial fraud statute, no insurrection charges, no sedition conspiracy. They're trying to find anything they can to pin on this guy because they know they have a Democrat judge who's extremely lenient to the government, despite her phony ruling that's really bizarre. They're going to have a Democrat jury. They have a Democrat prosecutor. The whole thing is fixed. You've got the Atlanta DA. She's plotting to use a mob law, we read, a RICO statute against Trump. So that's the Klan law, the Enron law, financial fraud law, the mob RICO law. This has nothing to do with Donald Trump. None of it. And then we have the 1917 Espionage Act on the documents case. Well, I'm sure a lot of top officials have been charged with that one. None. Hillary Clinton destroys 30,000 emails. No obstruction charge. She has classified information in her home that's unprotected in violation of federal law. No charge there. She lies about it. No obstruction there. They destroy their cell phones that have been subpoenaed by Congress. No obstruction there, as well as the documents that I told you about. Oh, she's lucky. And then what about Bill Clinton? His classified videos hidden in his sock drawer. Obama judge, and another Obama judge, Jackson, who was sitting in the back row when Donald Trump was in that courtroom a few weeks ago, she rules about a decade ago, well, the Presidential Records Act gives the President of the United States and the former President of the United States absolute latitude on what he can do with those documents. And in Smith's indictment of Trump on the documents, he doesn't even mention the Presidential Records Act, and he doesn't even mention the Obama judge's ruling, because it doesn't provide him with what he wants, which is to hunt down Donald Trump. And the Presidential Records Act was not there to protect Hillary Clinton. It didn't apply to her. It's called the Presidential Records Act. But we're told we don't charge people for that sort of thing. Donald Trump is facing life in prison times, God knows how many years, because of these same rules. Now, in 1973 and in 2000, the Office of Legal Counsel of the Department of Justice, this is the brain trust of the Department of Justice, both issued a memo, and they say the same thing. You cannot indict a sitting president. They say, why? The Constitution doesn't say that. They said, but it'll undermine the Constitution. You can't have a man as President of the United States with all those responsibilities that he has, trying to run the country from the executive branch at the same time trying to protect his liberty. It's simply impossible to do both. And so they said, you cannot indict a sitting president. And so I've said to myself, and yet you can indict a man who's the former president running for president? Well, it's not the same thing, Mark. He's not running the executive branch. It's worse. It's worse, because you have the administration of the man who is currently president, who knows that he's immunized from any charges of indictment as a result of these decisions, trying his administration to put his opponent, just like Putin, in prison. That's what's going on here. Donald Trump can't possibly defend his liberty and handle two Democrat DA lists of indictments, because Atlanta's coming, indictments in Washington, D.C., indictments in Washington, D.C. that have now been transferred to Florida. He's going to have over 100 counts against him. It is not possible to do both. Well, Mark, then maybe he shouldn't run for president. Isn't that their goal? Meanwhile, we have a special counsel now appointed to investigate Hunter Biden. And by the way, that special counsel was only appointed because the U.S. Attorney, David Weiss, said last Tuesday to the Attorney General, I need to be a special counsel. So they wait 3 days, and on Friday they say, okay. Now, what does that tell you? That tells you we needed to be a special counsel from the start. Bill Barr didn't do it. He's on TV making excuses. But when Garland came in over 2 years ago, he should have done it. So there should have been no question whatsoever. But this is a sideshow. There needs to be a special counsel to investigate Joe Biden. He's the president of the United States. His son is one thing. He's the other. His son doesn't have an impact on my life. Joe Biden does. And what are the issues, Mr. Attorney General? Potential issues include tax evasion, money laundering, extortion, bribery, fraud. RICO, they like it in Atlanta, and it ought to be good for Washington. Obstruction, conspiracy, wire fraud, and this is the biggest one, FARA. That Foreign Registration Act, it's a very, very general act. And there's no question in my view that Hunter Biden violated it. It's so obvious. Joe Biden was a co-conspirator in assisting his son in violating that act. He didn't have to take one penny, not one dime. It's about time the Republicans on Capitol Hill understand what a co-conspirator is.